The son complained to his stepmother about his father before boarding his flight. The father decided to install a hidden camera, and when he saw the recordings, he was horrified by what he saw in the workshop scented with sawdust and linseed oil. The young Emiliano watched attentively as his grandfather Octavio skillfully handled the wood. "Look, Emiliano, each cut must be precise, as if you were telling a story," his grandfather would say, his eyes shining beneath the wrinkles marked by time. The workshop was his world, a realm of creation and learning in the heart of Guanajuato, far from the concerns of the outside world. Emiliano absorbed every word, replicating the movements with a seriousness that transcended his 12 years. "I'll give it a try, Grandpa. I want it to be perfect," he replied, his hand trembling slightly as he guided the saw. The boy had a thirst for learning, a flame ignited by his grandfather since he was very young. Octavio smiled proudly, thinking of how the boy resembled his mother, the daughter he had tragically lost during Emiliano's birth. In the afternoon, while sharing a modest lunch of tortillas and beans, Octavio talked about Emiliano's mother. "She had your smile, you know, and that same determination in her eyes," he recounted, tears filling his eyes with memories. Emiliano listened, hanging on every word, building the image of a mother he would never know except through these stories. The absence of Emiliano's father, Salvador, echoed through the house. Octavio tried to fill it with love and attention, but he knew it wasn't enough. "Your father loves you, Emiliano. He just doesn't know how to show it," Octavio explained, trying to soften the harsh reality of Salvador's neglect. Emiliano nodded, his thoughts lost in the image of a father who only appeared sporadically, bringing gifts that seemed more like obligations than expressions of love. At night, surrounded by the wooden toys he had created, Emiliano thought about the day, the moments with his grandfather, the stories about his mother, and the distant father who seemed more like a figure from a fairy tale than a reality. He dreamt of a day when he could show his father what he had learned and perhaps finally feel the embrace he had been missing. The next day, Octavio, with his hair already silvered by age, moved more slowly through the workshop. His eyes were tired but still filled with love for Emiliano. "You're becoming an excellent carpenter, Emiliano. You can start working on larger projects," he said with a tired smile. Emiliano, noticing his grandfather's fatigue, insisted that he should rest more. "I can take care of the workshop, Grandpa. You've done enough," Emiliano said, worried about the health of his grandfather weakening with each passing day. Neighbor Doña Lupe, a robust and welcoming lady, had become a constant presence in their lives. She knocked on their door almost every day, bringing dishes of mole and enchiladas, making sure Octavio and Emiliano were well fed. "Octavio, you need to eat well to keep that cough away," she gently reprimanded, while Emiliano smiled, grateful for her concern. Emiliano sometimes helped Doña Lupe in her garden in exchange for the cooking lessons she gave him. "You need to know how to cook, Emiliano. You can't live on tortillas and beans alone," she said, teaching him to prepare traditional dishes. It was during those moments in Doña Lupe's kitchen that Emiliano felt a glimpse of what it would be like to have a mother. She told stories about family, shared laughter, and the warmth of a home-cooked meal. Emiliano's life was woven with the threads of these connections, the teachings of his grandfather, the caring presence of Doña Lupe, and the dream of bridging the gap with his distant father. As the days unfolded in the tranquil village of Guanajuato, Emiliano continued to navigate the complexities of family, learning valuable lessons from the love that surrounded him. The city gave advice and always had a listening ear for the thoughts and concerns of the boy. When Octavio needed to visit the doctor or go to the pharmacy, it was Doña Lupe who stayed with Emiliano. "Don't worry, Octavio. I'll take care of Emiliano as if he were my own grandson," she sincerely assured Emiliano. Although he missed his grandfather, he enjoyed Doña Lupe's company. They played cards, listened to the radio, and talked about everything and nothing at the same time. One night, when Octavio returned from one of those doctor visits, he seemed particularly weak. Sitting in the old armchair, he looked at Emiliano with a serious expression. "Emiliano, I'm not well. The doctor said," he began, but was interrupted by Emiliano. "Don't say anything, Grandpa. I know. I just want you to rest and get better," Emiliano replied, holding back tears and hugging his grandfather tightly. In the following days, Mr. Octavio's health deteriorated, and he had to be hospitalized. Doña Lupe became even more present, taking care of Emiliano, cooking together, and assisting with school activities. One Sunday morning, Doña Lupe received the dreaded call she had feared. On the other end of the line, a soft voice from the Guanajuato hospital delivered the heartbreaking news. Octavio had passed away. Feeling a lump in her chest, knowing she would have to break the news to Emiliano, Doña Lupe, with heavy steps, walked to the neighboring house. Her heart burdened with sorrow for what she was about to share, she found Emiliano in the workshop, surrounded by pieces of wood and tools. Taking a deep breath, Doña Lupe began, "Emiliano, my dear, I have very sad news." Her voice choked with emotion. "Your grandfather has left us." The words hung in the air like heavy, brutal stones. Emiliano looked at her, his eyes filling with tears. The reality of the sudden and cruel loss palpable. Doña Lupe hugged him tightly, offering the comfort that his father had called me. She continued, trying to ease the pain with some hopeful news. "He said he will come to pick you up soon, to live with him. Until then, I will take care of you as if you were my own family." Emiliano, lost in his grief and surprise, only nodded, finding a small consolation in Doña Lupe's words and embrace. Emiliano sat on the floor of his room, looking at the open suitcase in front of him. Each piece of clothing he folded and placed in the suitcase felt like closing a chapter of his life. The wooden toy he and his grandfather had made together was the first thing he packed, followed by the carpentry tools Octavio had given him. Despite the sadness enveloping him, the idea of finally living with his father brought a glimmer of comfort. Maybe it won't be so bad, he thought, trying to convince himself that a new life with his father could fill the void left by his grandfather. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence of the house. It was his father, Salvador, standing at the door with a sad smile. "Emiliano, my son," he said, opening his arms for a hug. The hug was awkward at first, but Emiliano allowed himself to be enveloped by his father's presence, feeling a bit safer. "I'm so sorry about your grandfather. He was an incredible man," Salvador said, looking around the house that emanated memories of Octavio. Seated in the living room, Salvador tried to console Emiliano. "You've grown so much since the last time I saw you," he observed, looking at his son with a mix of pride and remorse. "From now on, I'll take care of you, and we'll start a new life together." Emiliano nodded, his father's words sounding distant as he struggled to absorb the impending change. Salvador helped Emiliano finish packing, and upon seeing the carpentry tools, he asked, "Are you taking these, Emiliano?" Emiliano looked at the tools, recalling the afternoons in the workshop with Octavio. "Yes, they are very important to me. They were my grandfather's," he replied, his voice firm despite the sadness. Salvador nodded, recognizing the value of these objects for his son. Emiliano bid farewell to Doña Lupe with tears in his eyes. She whispered gently, "I'll always be here for whatever you need. Now go and live, enjoy everything." On the way to the new house, Salvador attempted to engage in conversation, talking about school and the neighborhood they now lived in, trying to fill the uncomfortable silences. Emiliano listened, responding when necessary, but his mind was occupied with memories of his grandfather and the life he was leaving behind. Salvador looked at Emiliano with a somewhat hesitant expression. "Emiliano, I need to tell you about Elena, my wife. We got married almost 3 years ago," he began. Emiliano listened attentively, surprised by the news of having a stepmother. "She used to be a lawyer before we got married, a very smart and kind woman." Upon arriving at the new house, Emiliano was greeted by a woman with a warm smile and welcoming eyes. "You must be Emiliano. I'm Elena. Nice to meet you," she said, extending her hand. Emiliano, a bit shy, returned the gesture. "Hello. Nice to meet you too," he replied, feeling a bit more comfortable with Elena's warm welcome. Elena introduced Emiliano to her son Lucas, who was almost the same age. Lucas, a tall boy with a friendly smile, greeted Emiliano enthusiastically. "It's great to have someone my age here." "We'll get along well," Lucas said, giving Emiliano a friendly pat on the shoulder. Despite the unexpected situation, the two boys quickly found common ground, sharing an interest in video games and sports. During dinner, Elena prepared a traditional Mexican dish, enchiladas, trying to make Emiliano feel at home. "I hope you like it, Emiliano. I know it's hard to change homes, but I want you to feel welcome here," she said with a gentle smile. Although still wrapped in confusing feelings, Emiliano thanked her, saying, "Thank you, it's delicious." The conversation during dinner revolved around light topics. Salvador talked about his work, while Elena asked Emiliano about his preferences and hobbies. "Emiliano, what do you like to do? Do you have any hobbies?" Elena asked with interest. "I like carpentry. I learned it from my grandfather," Emiliano replied, his face lighting up. Emiliano felt a bit more relaxed. The presence of Lucas and the kindness of Elena helped soften the transition to his new life. Salvador observed everything, feeling relieved to see that Emiliano was adapting. "We're going to make this work, Emiliano. We're going to be a family," he said, placing his hand on his son's shoulder and showing him his new room. It was larger than the one in Guanajuato, although it still lacked the warmth and familiarity of the home he knew. "You'll get used to it. You'll see," Salvador reassured, putting a hand on Emiliano's shoulder. "Feel at home. This house is yours now." Emiliano looked around, feeling a mix of anxiety and hope. Perhaps with time, he could truly call that place home. Emiliano began to adapt to his new routine in Salvador's house. His father took him to enroll in the local school, the same one Lucas attended. It was a well-known school in the neighborhood, just a few blocks away from the house. On the way to school, Salvador tried to reassure Emiliano about his new life. "Certainly, here is the transformation. Emiliano, you'll like it here. The teachers are excellent, and you already have a friend," Salvador said, referring to Lucas. Emiliano nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and curiosity. Salvador's routine as a private pilot meant he spent 1 month at home and another month traveling. During the month at home, he tried to make up for lost time with Emiliano by organizing family outings and dedicating time to get to know his son better. "I'm happy that you're adjusting, Emiliano. Let's make the most of our time together," Salvador would say at home. Emiliano showed himself as a sweet and polite child, reflecting the care and values his grandfather had instilled in him. He helped Elena with small tasks and spent a lot of time playing with Lucas. The two boys seemed to get along very well, sharing interests in games and sports. "Emiliano, you have a very kind way about you. That's rare," remarked one of his teachers at school. Emiliano felt grateful and somewhat surprised by the warmth. One morning during breakfast, Salvador made an announcement that lit up Emiliano's face. "I've prepared a surprise for you, Emiliano," he began smiling. "I've set up the room at the back of the house as your woodworking studio. I bought some tools and wood so you can start your projects." "Really, Dad? Can I do my own projects there?" Emiliano asked, eyes shining with excitement. Elena observed the scene with a surprised expression. She knew Salvador had never done anything like this for Lucas, despite them living together. Still, she concealed her discontent. "That's a wonderful idea, Salvador," she said with a cautious smile. Lucas, who had been silent until then, looked at Emiliano and said, "This is awesome, buddy. Maybe you can teach me something about woodworking." Emiliano smiled at Lucas. "Sure, it'll be fun to work together." The idea of sharing his love for woodworking with Lucas excited him even more. Emiliano could hardly concentrate on classes, thinking about the workshop that awaited him at home. He was already planning the projects he would create, furniture and wooden toys, just like he used to make with his grandfather. "I'm going to make something special for the house, something everyone can use," he thought, planning his first significant project. When Emiliano got home, he rushed to the room at the back of the house. It was a modest space, but perfect for his needs. The new tools were neatly arranged, and the wood was stacked carefully in a corner. Running his fingers over the tools, Emiliano felt a connection with each of them. "My grandfather would have loved to see this," he murmured, a sad smile forming on his lips. In the following days, Emiliano spent all his free time in the workshop, completely absorbed in his work. Elena and Lucas would sometimes visit, impressed by the skill and dedication Emiliano showed. Salvador, seeing his son so committed, felt proud and happy about the decision to set up the workshop. On the day Salvador left, Emiliano felt a mix of anxiety and expectation. He bid farewell to his father with a tight hug, listening to Salvador's last pieces of advice. Take care, Emiliano. I'll be back before you know it, Salvador said, trying to instill confidence in his son. Emiliano nodded, trying to hold on to the sense of stability that the past month had given him. Elena and Lucas bid farewell to Salvador as he left. However, Emiliano noticed an almost immediate change in Elena's behavior. The warm smiles and friendly conversations were replaced by a more distant and formal attitude. She seemed less patient, her words were sharper, and her once warm smile now appeared forced. "Lucas, why is your mom acting like this?" Emiliano asked quietly one day. "I don't know, she's unpredictable," replied Lucas, looking confused and a bit concerned. In the following days, Elena's transformation became more evident. Where there was once kindness, there was now coldness. Emiliano, used to his grandfather's loving environment, felt increasingly displaced. One occasion, while organizing the living room, Elena abruptly said, "Emiliano, you need to take care of the garden. We also need to keep the house in order." The coldness in her voice was new and bewildering for Emiliano. Emiliano's responsibilities increased rapidly, finding himself doing more household chores while Lucas had more free time. One afternoon, while Emiliano was washing the dishes, he asked Elena, "Can I finish this later? I want to work on a project in the workshop." Elena replied curtly, "First the obligations, Emiliano. You can go to the workshop after finishing everything here." Emiliano began to feel the weight of his father's absence and the loss of his grandfather more intensely. He sought refuge in his workshop, the only place where he felt connected to his roots in the memory of Octavio. Lying on his bed, Emiliano stared at the ceiling, lost in his thoughts. Why did everything change so quickly? He wondered, tossing and turning in bed. The image of his grandfather smiled at him in his memory, bringing a sense of warmth and security that he missed so much. Did I do something wrong? Am I bothering Doña Elena? Maybe I should be quieter to avoid disturbing her, Emiliano thought, pacing back and forth. Nostalgia for his grandfather, concern for his father's absence, and Elena's sudden coldness mixed, creating a whirlwind of emotions. "I just want things to go back to how they used to be," he sighed, closing his eyes and trying to find some comfort in the happiest memories of his childhood. The next day, Emiliano was abruptly awakened by Elena, who knocked on his door much earlier than usual. "Emiliano, wake up. You need to clean the garden before going to school," she said, her tone brooking no argument. Still groggy and confused, Emiliano quickly got up. "But why so early?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "No questions. Just do what I told you," Elena replied, turning away and leaving the room. While Emiliano worked in the garden, Elena watched him from the kitchen window. Her thoughts reflected a mix of resentment and disdain. Salvador does more than he should for this boy. He's not our real son. Emiliano won't have the easy life he's expecting here, she thought, irritated. Emiliano's meals shifted to a separate schedule from the rest of the family, often eating alone in the kitchen. Elena became increasingly rigid and demanding with him, while Lucas received a much more friendly and flexible treatment. Emiliano, feeling more like a stranger in that house, struggled to maintain composure. One night, Emiliano expressed the desire to call his father, but Elena quickly reproached him. "Don't be selfish, Emiliano. Your father is working. Do you want him to get angry with you for bothering him?" she said, imposing a psychological pressure that made Emiliano feel guilty just for considering seeking support from his father. "I don't want to be a problem," Emiliano thought, his heart heavy with the idea of being a burden to his father. When Salvador returned home after his long work trip, the atmosphere in the house instantly changed. Elena, who had been cold and rigid with Emiliano in recent days, returned to being the sweet and welcoming woman Emiliano knew when Salvador was around. "Salvador, dear, how was the trip?" she asked with a radiant smile, embracing her husband. Emiliano, observing from a distance, noticed the immediate change but chose to remain silent, watching his father so happy to be home. During dinner, Salvador excitedly recounted his trip while Elena listened attentively, laughing and commenting at appropriate moments. Emiliano participated in the conversation, but his gaze was distant and thoughtful. "Is everything okay at school, Emiliano?" Salvador asked, noticing his son's expression. "Yes, Dad, everything's fine," Emiliano replied, forcing a smile. In the following days, Emiliano's routine became lighter. Elena no longer asked him to do extra chores and even offered to help, but he declined. "No, Emiliano, you've done enough. Go rest or play with Lucas," she said in a gentle voice that contrasted with the tone she used when Salvador was absent. Emiliano felt relief mixed with confusion. On one hand, he was grateful not to deal with Elena's demands, but on the other hand, her sudden change in behavior made him feel suspicious and sad. He spent long hours in his workshop, immersed in his carpentry projects, seeking refuge in the memories of his grandfather. One night, lying in bed, Emiliano seriously considered whether he should tell his father about Elena's behavior during his absence. "Dad, I need to tell you something." He began hesitantly the next day while helping Salvador with a small repair in the house. Reflecting on whether it was the right time to speak, Emiliano said, "Dad, I need to tell you how things were while you were away." Salvador looked at his son, setting aside the tool. "What's going on, Emiliano? You can tell me anything," he said. Emiliano looked at his father with a mix of nervousness and determination. "Dad, I need to tell you how things were when you were away," he began, his voice trembling. "Elena changed completely. She became rigid and made me do all the house chores while Lucas did nothing." Surprised by the revelation, Salvador furrowed his brow, trying to process his son's words. "Son, are you sure about what you're saying? Elena is a wonderful person. I've seen her taking care of Lucas all these years, and she's never been like that," Salvador responded, clearly skeptical. "You know that all of this is new for you. Maybe you're feeling a bit out of place and interpreting things differently," Salvador continued, trying to reassure his son. Emiliano felt a pang of frustration, seeing that his father wasn't taking his concerns seriously. "Okay, Dad, maybe I'm really seeing things differently," Emiliano said, trying to hide his disappointment. Inside, he knew the truth, but he realized he wouldn't be able to convince his father. In the following days, Emiliano decided not to insist on the matter. He saw that his father genuinely didn't understand Elena's true nature, and he believed it would be better to keep his concerns to himself. The experience left him shattered, feeling even more isolated in a house he still struggled to call home. As soon as Salvador left again, the change in the house's atmosphere became evident once more. Immediately, Elena became even more rigid and authoritarian with Emiliano. On the first day, she approached him with a list of tasks. "Emiliano, you must clean the house, wash the dishes, and tend to the garden. No working in your workshop today. You have a lot of work here," she declared, handing him the list. Emiliano looked at the list, feeling overwhelmed. "But Elena, I need time for my projects," he tried to argue, but was immediately interrupted. "I don't want to hear excuses. You are under my roof, so you will follow my rules," she pronounced with a tone that allowed no room for reply. Even Lucas, who had been like a brother to Emiliano, started to change. He walked past Emiliano without a word, completely ignoring him. One day, Emiliano tried to initiate a conversation. "Lucas, do you want to play video games after dinner?" Emiliano asked, seeking some kind of interaction. Lucas, without even looking at him, responded coldly, "I'm busy. Besides, I prefer playing alone." Emiliano felt a pang in his heart, realizing he was losing the only friend he thought he had in that house. As days passed, Emiliano became increasingly isolated, often reminiscing about his grandfather, Don Lupe, and the life he had before. Those memories provided both solace and sorrow, reminding him of how much his life had changed. "I just wish someone understood me," Emiliano thought with tears in his eyes, feeling utterly abandoned in a house that seemed less like a home with each passing day. One quiet night, unable to sleep, Emiliano heard a muted conversation from Elena's room. Intrigued, he approached stealthily and overheard Elena talking on the phone. "Stefano, can you come here tomorrow? We need to sort out some things," she said urgently. Emiliano furrowed his brow, wondering who Stefano could be, a name he had never heard before. The next day, Emiliano was on high alert, anticipating the arrival of this mysterious visitor. When Stefano arrived, Emiliano hid behind a bush in the garden, watching them from a distance. Stefano seemed impatient and direct in his words. "Elena, we've been postponing this for too long. When are you going to resolve the issue of your husband's money?" he asked, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. Elena, with a calculating look, replied, I'm working on it, Stefano, but there's an unexpected obstacle, a meddling kid who is ruining my plans. Emiliano's heart raced as he realized he was the obstacle mentioned by Elena. He continued listening, trying to grasp the gravity of the situation. "And what are you going to do about it?" Stefano questioned, furrowing his brow. Elena sighed. "I'm arranging everything. Soon it won't be a problem anymore. I just need a bit more time." Emiliano was in shock, trying to process what he had heard. Elena was plotting something against his father and him. He knew he had to do something, but fear and uncertainty paralyzed him. How could she do this, and what exactly is she planning? Emiliano wondered, trembling behind the bushes. With Stefano's departure, Emiliano remained hidden, contemplating the severity of the situation. He knew he had to tell his father, but Elena controlled all forms of communication in the house. "I have to find a way to warn Dad before it's too late," Emiliano thought, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The innocence of his childhood seemed distant as he faced a much darker and dangerous reality. Determined to act, Emiliano spent the night in his woodworking workshop, crafting a plan to communicate with his father. He knew he had to be quick and careful, as any mistake could jeopardize everything. Based on Elena's meticulous routine, he knew she took a long bath every day at precisely 2 in the afternoon. The perfect moment to act. The next day, Emiliano remained vigilant, eagerly awaiting Elena's bath. As soon as she entered the bathroom, he swiftly went to her room, took her phone, and headed straight to the workshop, where he could speak without being heard. Every second was crucial, and fearing the worst, Emiliano found his father's number saved as love in Elena's contacts. He dialed the number, and when he heard his father's voice on the other end, he spoke rapidly, trying to control the anxiety in his voice. "Dad, it's Emiliano. I need to tell you something very important and serious about what's happening here." There was a pause on the other end. "Emiliano, what has happened? Are you okay?" his father asked, clearly surprised and confused by not hearing Elena's voice. "Dad, you must listen to me. Since you went on the trip, things here have changed. Elena is not who we thought she was. She becomes harsh with me when you're not around, makes me do all the household chores, and forbids me from using the workshop. And Lucas, he's changed too. He's no longer my friend," Emiliano explained with hurried and emotionally charged words. "Emiliano, this is very serious. Are you sure about this?" "Elena has always been so good to us," his father replied, his voice revealing a mix of concern and disbelief. "Dad, I know it sounds strange, but it's true. And there's more. Last night I overheard her talking to someone named Stefano. They were discussing resolving some money issue, and she mentioned that I am an obstacle to her plans." Emiliano continued, trying to convince his father of the gravity of the situation. "This is very grave, Emiliano. I don't know what to think, but I will sort it out. Just keep acting normally until I return. I'll be there in 2 days and we'll clear this up. Don't talk to anyone about this, okay? I need to understand what's happening," his father instructed. Hanging up the phone, Emiliano felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. He had managed to tell his father, but now he had to maintain a facade of normalcy until Salvador returned. Sitting in his hotel room, Salvador pondered everything Emiliano had told him. He knew who Stefano was, but he never imagined him being involved in something so sinister. Stefano, Elena's ex-husband, and Lucas's father, Salvador murmured to himself, trying to connect the pieces. Seated in his hotel room, Salvador began to reflect on everything Emiliano had said. He had always blindly trusted Elena. Salvador and Emiliano found themselves on a journey of healing and rebuilding. The revelations about Elena and Stefano had shaken their world, but they were determined to move forward together, stronger than ever. Salvador's commitment to Emiliano deepened, and he made sure to create a nurturing and supportive environment for his son. The bond between them grew with each passing day. Salvador's travels, once a source of concern for Emiliano, now became an opportunity for them to appreciate the time they had together even more. The legal consequences for Elena and Stefano were significant. Authorities took action, and the duo faced the repercussions of their deceitful schemes. Lucas, caught in the crossfire, found himself in a new living arrangement with a relative, offering him a chance for a fresh start away from the tumultuous life his parents had created. For Salvador and Emiliano, the ordeal marked the end of a chapter filled with manipulation and betrayal. It was a time of rebuilding, and they seized the opportunity to reshape their lives. Salvador, recognizing the importance of a stable home, took steps to enhance Emiliano's living situation. The merging of his grandfather's house with Doña Lupe's became a symbol of this fresh start. Emiliano, now under the caring watch of Doña Lupe, found solace and stability. Salvador ensured that both Emiliano and Doña Lupe had everything they needed, from a comfortable living space to additional support. The financial security provided by Salvador reflected his commitment to their well-being. Their lives, once entangled in a web of deception, were now defined by honesty, trust, and love. Salvador's dedication to instilling values in Emiliano remained unwavering. They faced the future as a united front, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Salvador and Emiliano began the process of rebuilding their family. The ordeal had left scars, but together they forged ahead, stronger and more resilient. Their story became one of redemption, resilience, and the enduring power of familial bonds. And so, with a newfound sense of purpose and a solid foundation, Salvador and Emiliano embraced the journey ahead, grateful for the love and support that had carried them through the storm.